On my top 20 Thomas episodes videos, a lot of people asked me to do the top 10 worst, and logically that seems like the next way to go. But here's the problem. My least favorite episodes are exactly the same as everyone else's. Wonky Whistle, Percy's New Friends, Up and Away, Fiery Flynn, you name it. It would just be beating a dead horse if I ranted about what made them so terrible. And all of them would be in the new and CGI series, which, to be honest, I just haven't watched that much. I lost interest in Thomas during Season 8, and so I just haven't watched every episode from that era, or at least enough to make a top 10 list. What I do think would be interesting is if we looked at the worst of the best, the classic series. In fact, I was gonna do a top 10 worst Audrey episodes list, but it was just way too difficult to find many bad ones. It would just get down to nitpicking. So I'm doing seasons 1 to 7, and even then I couldn't come up with 10 episodes that were really terrible, so I decided to just go with top 8, or bottom 8. And again, this is all my opinion, and I will say that some of the episodes on here will probably make a few people angry about being on this list. But without further ado, here are the top 8 or bottom 8 worst Thomas episodes from the classic series. Number 8, Better Late Than Never. The story that this episode is based on was written by Christopher Audrey. However, it was actually written for the TV series to adapt it. This was because back then the agreement was that all stories had to be based on Railway series stories. And boy does it show here. This is one of the most forgettable episodes. I have no memories of watching it as a kid, and I know I must have because I remember watching the VHS it was featured on. It's a very slow-paced episode, and actually pretty complicated for its intended audience. That's my main issue. What exactly happened? Thomas is tired of being late, and then one day he's very late because of James, but it turns out he isn't late because Bertie broke down, and what does Better Late Than Never have to do with this? What's the message? Sometimes being late isn't all that bad? It's just very confusing with virtually no action. I put it last on the list because it's not a bad episode. It's just boring and forgettable. It definitely feels like Christopher Audrey had run out of ideas and had to come up with a story quickly. Number 7, A Close Shave, or A Close Shave for Duck. Okay, let me make one thing clear before I get shot. Too late. But anyway, let me emphasize that it's not the story itself I don't like. In fact, it's a great one. Duck is quite a hero, and crashing into a barber shop is just classic. But that's not my issue. My issue is that after such an infuriating cliffhanger in the previous episode, we all want to see Diesel get his ass kicked. But the next episode focuses on something completely different. Well, okay, do we see Diesel in disgrace? Nope, the Fat Controller just says he sent him packing because he didn't believe him. What the actual f***? You can't just have a cliffhanger where our main character is framed and sent away only to just completely gloss over it in the next episode. There's a reason I made those Diesel episodes in Engines of Sodor. I felt like we never got to see true justice to Duck. But what's so funny is how similar this is to Snoke's death in Star Wars. But at least we saw his death. What if Kylo just told Rey that he had killed Snoke and that was it? That's exactly what happened here. I think they should have gone for a 4-part story, to be honest. You could even keep A Close Shave as the 3rd and then have the 4th be a concurrent story. You can save Domeless Engines for a different book. What's a story about Gordon doing in a book about Duck and Diesel? So, yeah, I like the story itself, but it's just really underwhelming to put this as the main focus, after our main character went through so much despair in the last episodes at the hands, or wheels, of a nasty character. Justice wasn't served, in my opinion. Number 6, Gordon and the Gremlin. It actually astounds me that I had to put a Season 5 episode on here, but it suffers from the same problem as Better Late Than Never. It's confusing! First of all, it doesn't really give a good explanation as to what gremlins are, just that they're little green men who play tricks. I think they need to emphasize more that gremlins really love screwing around with machinery and hardware, and a railway would be a perfect place for that. People who play tricks could be any creature, like goblins, gnomes, whatever. But that's not my main issue. The story is just very inconsistent. It starts off with everyone complaining about gremlins, then Gordon going too fast pulling a VIP, then her dog running off with Thomas. Yeah, why the hell did Thomas leave with a dog in his cab? That's animal cruelty. It's just a very strange assortment of incidents all shoved together to make a complex story that's hard to follow. And they're all tied together by a very weak joke where Dowager Hat names her dog Gremlin, and the Fat Controller says he's met one at last. I think you should have named that dog by now, and even so, who would want to be called Gremlin? How would you like it if you were named after this? And it seems very strange that a Thomas episode would be associated with these creatures. That being said, I do like the reveal of the guest being Sir Topham Hatt's mother, and there are a few funny moments with the dog. I just feel like this episode needed another rewrite to make it less confusing. Number 5. What's the matter with Henry? Of course, when you write a story about Henry, he has to be sick. Oh well, at least there's nothing to do with Special Coal. But by God, this episode is just mean. Thomas and Percy are real dicks here. Yeah, I know they get punished in the end, but it was too light. Just go and collect Henry's trucks, which, by the way, didn't Henry and Emily already deliver? They should be shunting for the rest of the day. What they did was like leaving a person in a wheelchair to climb up the stairs. Not only that, but why the hell would the yard manager agree to give Henry more trucks? And did Thomas and Percy take any trucks with them, or did they leave them all for Henry? I think this episode really highlights the problem with Henry. The writers just can't seem to find any character qualities in Henry other than he's just sick. I don't usually praise the newer series, but at least they tried to give him an actual personality, a gentle, peaceful giant. That being said, I do like that Henry was determined to get the job done, and I just love Henry's theme in this episode. Also, as mean-spirited as it was, Thomas's line about Henry's boiler grumbling was pretty funny. But other than that, I just feel like this episode just picks on Henry unfairly. This is the only Season 7 episode on this list, which may surprise a lot of people, but to be honest, I didn't think Season 7 was that bad. It had some pretty good stories. Season 6 did too, but boy did it have some real stinkers as well. Number 4. Rusty saves the day. Talk about inconsistency and lack of continuity. Rusty Saves the Day feels like they rewrote Sodor's history just for this episode. Since when do Scarlowi and Rheneas have their own line? Since when does Rusty only get to work at the quarry instead of doing maintenance on the regular line? Hey, here's a hint. He's a maintenance diesel. That's his job. And if we're to assume that Scarlowi and Rheneas' line is the whole Scarlowi Railway, then wouldn't closing it also close the quarry? And how the hell could you let a popular line like that fall into such disrepair? Basically, the Fat Controller closed the whole railway except the quarry? So no more passengers? Last time I checked, the railway was one of the most popular tourist attractions on the island. And how did Rheneas and Scarlowi's line go from at least serviceable to downright decrepit in a few days? This doesn't make any damn sense! Who wrote this? I'm convinced whoever did had no idea what Thomas and Friends even was. Oh. What the fuck? Now I will say the concept is not bad if you give it a few tweaks. It's a typical repair the railway story. But boy, was it executed so poorly here. I seem to be hit and miss with continuity when it comes to the show. For example, I don't mind if Percy and Duck work at the docks now and then, or Birdie driving all over the island, or Bill and Ben working in the center of the island instead of the China Clay Works. But then again, I get quite irritated when you completely disregard past events, like Henry having his new shape in The Adventure Begins. I think we can all agree that Rusty Saves the Day has a severe lack of continuity. Okay, I've ranted about continuity enough. What else is wrong? Well, not much, but I will say it's just not a very interesting episode. Aside from Elizabeth and the Fat Controller, Season 6 Baldwin is boring as usual, Elizabeth's sudden character turn is way too quick, and last of all, this last line is so cheesy.
And Rusty just smiled.
Now with that being said, I don't think it's the worst episode. It's boring, but if you ignore the continuity, the story isn't that bad. But by God, did the staff suddenly get a spell of amnesia when they wrote this? Regardless, I've always wanted to do this for a long time.
We are going to be blasting for the next 2 weeks.
Number 3. Thomas's Train, or A Big Day for Thomas. Okay, yes, this is another episode that will cause a riot if I put it on the list, but I'm sorry. How the hell did Thomas not know he wasn't pulling anything? If you know me, I can take a lot of unrealism, but this is where I draw the line. This is by far the worst story written by Wilbert Awdry. You could argue that Thomas never pulled trains before, so he wouldn't know what it felt like, but that doesn't work because we see him pulling coaches at the beginning of the episode. It'd be one thing if he only took the first coach and left the rest behind, but leaving all of them? Just no! This is something the Miller era would do. You could argue, Awdry's stories were based on real events. Well, okay, if Thomas wasn't alive and this was in real life, it could actually happen. The crew could start the engine before realizing that the train wasn't coupled. But Thomas is a sentient engine. He should feel the couplings on his behind. God, that sounds so wrong. But you get the idea. Thomas should know the weight of coaches. He's pulled them before. I guess you could argue Thomas was so excited and absent-minded that he just didn't realize, kind of like someone forgetting to put on their pants before going to school. But Thomas went quite a distance before he realized, so I just don't buy it. Sorry, Awdry, but even for a world of talking trains, this is a little hard to believe. Number 2. Buffer Bother. Let me ask you, who wants to watch a whole episode about a character whining, complaining, and sulking? Not me. Well, okay, only if it's entertaining, but this one is not. What exactly is the message supposed to be? Be clumsy and you might get whatever you want in the end? Or is it just being responsible and reliable? Boring! Haven't heard that before! This episode is just not interesting. Bill is jealous about his brother's new buffers. No one cares! Not only that, but this is the only episode where Ben has those new buffers. They never appear again. Talk about being pointless. This entire episode is just dedicated to Bill throwing a temper tantrum. Again, if done right, that could be pretty funny. Look at Off the Rails or A Better View for Gordon. Think about it. Both episodes were just Gordon complaining and then ending up in trouble. But there was a big difference between that and Buffer Bother. Both episodes were funny. Gordon's dialogue was written in a very satirical and pompous yet sophisticated way, so it's even more better when he gets what's coming to him. Buffer Bother is just, again, boring. And one thing that makes it really boring is Alec Baldwin's awful narration. Big shock, Alec Baldwin was pretty terrible in Season 6. He had a few good voices like Salty, Elizabeth. Holy shit, that's it!
Scary Jack Frost, cried James.
I don't know what happened. People say it's because of the Magic Railroad's failure, but to be honest, I wonder if it might be due to the fact he had that nasty divorce with Kim Basinger the same year as Season 6. Who knows? But regardless, it's just so sad how he completely dropped his greatest character voices such as Henry, Duncan, and especially Bill and Ben. By God, it was hilarious when Bill and Ben sounded like an angry Mickey Mouse, and here there's like no emotion. But I will admit, this line was pretty funny.
All over Mavis. Bill, gasped Mavis.
I'm sorry, but I have to do this as well.
Bill, 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 Bill.
The quarry set is also pretty boring, and it has like no color to it, but then again, neither did the whole of Season 6. But that's a topic for another day. Overall, this episode was just uninteresting and a complete letdown to two of my favorite characters. And before I get to number 1, here are a few honorable, or dishonorable, mentions. Trust Thomas. Like Gordon and the Gremlin, Better Late Than Never, the plot is just so confusing. It has all these different subplots and doesn't do a really good job of tying them together. However, I left it off the list because it is still nostalgic and the crash is great. The Old Bridge. It has a great message about PTSD, but why they needed to use Skarloey as the main character, I have no idea. One Good Turn. It starts out as a nice twin versus twin story, but the ending is just way too anticlimactic. How do you go from bitter enemies to just laughing and making amends within seconds? Rusty to the Rescue. Yes, I'm gonna get attacked again. Great sets, great suspense, I'll say that, but I'm sorry. How does a narrow gauge railway go all the way to the scrapyard, let alone taking a whole day to get there? It just seems like it was a cheap way to get Rusty into the spotlight. And I think the right main character for this would honestly be Oliver, but it's still quite nostalgic and epic, so I just couldn't put it on the list. In fact, it would be sacrilege. Percy's predicament. Great crash, but the Fat Controller is just a pure dick. And this issue leads me into my number one. And the number one worst episode of the classic series is Middle Engine. Boy, does this episode make me angry. It did as a kid, and still does to this day. First of all, remember Ari and Bert, the absolutely terrifying characters? Well, now they're just regular bullies. Well, okay, I can give that a pass, but what else? Well, the Fat Controller's a right twat. One of my biggest pet peeves with the show is when the Fat Controller blames engines for things that were entirely out of their control. This happens in Thomas and the Trucks, Percy's Predicament, Break Band, Thomas Comes to Breakfast, Percy James and the Fruitful Day, Something in the Air, the list goes on. But I think it is at its worst here. Now, it's one thing if he apologizes later, like in Cranky Bugs, or Percy gets it right, but here, nothing. But my biggest issue with this episode is that Ari and Bert don't get punished. They're causing a lot of shit. It would be nice to see them... Wait, I take that back. We need to see them get their asses kicked. But instead, we go for a let's hate on James scenario. Don't get me wrong, he was arrogant and may have deserved it. But we still need justice for Percy. Like Buffer Bother, what exactly is the message? It's okay for bullies to pick on annoying people? That is seriously messed up. What should have happened is that Percy should have tricked Ari and Bert in the end, and made them into a middle engine or something like that. Then, at least we'd feel satisfied. When this episode ended, it just felt incomplete. Oh, and by the way, I'm pretty sure it goes against railway regulations for an engine to continue his work whilst being wedged between two trains. What else? Well, when I watched this as an adult, I realized the production is really tacky. First of all, if you look at the first shot of Ari and Bert, you can see James on the side. That's because they used a shot from a later scene in the beginning. It's from when James talks with Ari and Bert. Come on, you couldn't at least crop that? But that's not the worst. Listen to every time Alec Baldwin says coal cars. Coal, 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 coal. Notice something? Yeah. They just reused a recording of Cole and put it in whenever it was needed. And boy, it is so noticeable. So basically, I always hated this episode since I was a kid. It's just very unsatisfying and was sloppily written, and edited too as a matter of fact. It just made me very angry. It is, in my opinion, the worst episode of the classic series.